what had happened. Fat tire tracks churned through the sagebrush, crushing some plants and snapping others at their woody stalks. Spent 12-gauge shotgun shells littered the ground. Federal 4-shot. He speared one through its open end with his pen and sniffed. It still smelled of gunpowder. He retrieved 18 spent shells and bagged them. Later, after he'd sealed the evidence bag, he found 2 more shells. Since 18 shells were more than a representative sample, he tossed the 2 errant casings into the back of his pickup. There was a single empty Coors Light can on the northeast corner of the site. He bagged it and tagged it, and hoped the forensics lab in Laramie could pull prints from the outside or DNA from the lip. Problem was, the can looked much older than the spent shotgun shells, and he couldn't determine if it hadn't simply been discarded along the road a few weeks prior to the slaughter. Joe guessed that the incident had occurred either the night or day before, because the exploded carcasses hadn't yet been picked over by predators. Small spores of blood in the dirt hadn't yet dried black. Whoever had done it had shot them on the lek, a lek being an annual gathering of the birds where the males strutted and clucked to attract females for breeding. The lek was a concentric circle of birds with a strutting male grouse in the center of it. Some leks were so large and predictable that locals would drive out to the location to watch the avian meat market in action. The birds bred in mid-March, nested, and produced chicks in June. If someone was to choose the most opportune time to slaughter an entire flock, this was it, Joe knew. So Lek 64, as it had been designated by a multi-agency team of biologists charged with counting the number of healthy groupings within the state, was no more. Joe took a deep breath and put his hands on his hips. He was angry, and he worked his jaw. It would take hours to photograph the carcasses and measure and photograph the tire tracks. He knew he'd have to do it himself because the county forensics tech was an hour away, provided the tech was on call and would even respond to a game violation. Joe knew he was responsible for the gathering of all evidence to send to the state lab in Laramie, and it would have to get done before the snow that was falling on top of the mountains worked its way east and obscured the evidence. Since it was Friday and the lab technicians didn't work over the weekend, at best he'd hear something by the end of next week. He'd find whoever did this, he thought. It might take time, but he'd find the shooter or shooters. Fingerprints on the brass of the shells, tire analysis, the beer can, gossipy neighbors, or a drunken boast would lead him to the bad guys. Sometimes it was ridiculously easy to solve these kinds of crimes, because the kind of person who would leave such a naked scene often wasn't very smart. Joe had apprehended poachers in the past by finding photos of them posing with dead game on Facebook posts, or by looking at the taxidermy mounts in their homes, or by simply going to their front door, knocking, and saying, "I guess you know why I'm here." It had been amazing what kinds of answers that inquiry sometimes brought. But he wasn't angry because of the work ahead of him. There was also that special directive recently put out by Governor Rulon and his agency director about sage grouse. Preserving them, that is. Game and fish biologists and wardens had been ordered to pay special attention to where the grouse were located and how many there were. The status of the sage grouse population, according to Rulon, was pivotal to the future economic well-being of the state. Sage grouse in Wyoming had shifted from the status of a game bird regulated by the state into politics and economics on a national level. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was threatening to list the bird as an endangered species, because the overall population had declined, and if they did,